it didn't happen all at once. If it had, maybe I would have reacted differently, shock, anger, something loud. Instead, it began the way winter arrives in our city, almost politely. One day the air is only a little colder, the light a little shorter, and you tell yourself it's nothing. Then you look up weeks later and realize the season has changed without asking for permission. For years, Anna and I moved through a predictable orbit. We were married just over a decade, the kind of marriage that had earned its own shorthand. We didn't have to ask where the salt was or which mug the other preferred. Our small routines were like a second language. Fridays meant late grocery runs. Saturdays were for laundry and music and the lazy comfort of staying in. We called it the good quiet. It fit us. The first change was explained easily: travel. Her firm, small, ambitious, always pitching, landed a string of out-of-town clients. "Just an overnight," she said the first time, almost apologetically, as if asking my permission to be ambitious. She sent me a photo from the hotel lobby, a lobby that looked like every other lobby. Polished floors, 2 bright lights, a fake plant next to a chrome elevator. "Back tomorrow," she promised. And she was. She came home with a breakfast muffin for me, an inside joke scrawled on the napkin. I told myself that was what love looks like in a busy life, adapting without complaint. Then there was the second trip, and another after that. The distances were never far, 2 hours by train, sometimes less, but enough to redraw the edges of our week. She kept a small suitcase by the bedroom door, half-packed now as a default. I remember thinking how practical that seemed, how organized. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who turns a partner's success into suspicion. At home, though, other changes began to collect like dust you only notice when the sun is at a certain angle. She started closing the bathroom door when she showered, not unusual on its own, but her phone went in with her each time, the glow vanishing like a small ship behind a fogged window. She'd emerge in a towel, check the screen with a quick, concentrated look, then wrap the towel tighter and ask what we were doing for dinner. When I joked about her turning into a bone hermit, she smiled, tight and brief, a smile designed to end a conversation rather than start one. The kindness between us shifted shape. We were still polite. We still said, "Love you," before sleep, though the words felt thinner, like a paper cup refilled too many times. She used to fling her legs across my lap when we watched a show, a careless claim on space that felt like home. Lately she sat at the far end of the couch, ankles neatly crossed, a posture that belonged in a waiting room. I told myself she was tired. Travel compresses a person, new beds, new schedules, new faces. One evening, she came home from a quick overnight and headed straight for the laundry. She never did that. Laundry was my territory, by habit and by preference. She gathered a small pile from her suitcase, already sorting it, already tapping the machine on. "I spilled something on a blouse," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I offered to take over, but she shook her head and said she had it. Later, when I emptied the lint trap, I found a hotel sachet of lavender-scented bath salts crushed in the drum. She hates lavender. I dropped the sachet into the trash and told myself hotels give you whatever is cheapest. Work, she said, was a lot. She grew sharper around the edges in small ways, less patient with the cat meowing at closed doors, quick to sigh when I asked if she'd seen my keys. The ordinary frictions of cohabitation magnified slightly. When I made tea, she took it without comment, then forgot it on the table until it went cold. I started reheating mugs as a matter of course. "Next week is Zurich," she mentioned in passing one night, eyes on her laptop screen. "Just 2 nights." Zurich was new. I looked up from the cutting board. "Switzerland," I said, trying to sound neutral. "Since when do you have clients there?" She shrugged. "It's a referral." Big account. Could be good for us. The us hung there, and I wanted to believe in it. She kissed my cheek when she left the kitchen, and I caught the scent of a different perfume than the one on her dresser. Floral, lighter, not hers. I told myself the hotel samples must be generous this season. Before Zurich there was a different trip, a nearby city she'd visited once years ago with me, a weekend we still referenced when we passed a certain bakery. Same place as that time? I asked, thinking it would be simple to reminisce. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded quickly. Yeah. Same-ish. The word lodged in my mind. Same-ish is not the same as same. After she left, I opened a drawer and found her old travel adapter neatly coiled in its pouch. She usually kept it in her carry-on. Maybe she had a new one, I thought. People upgrade. Still, when she texted me a photo from her hotel view, a skyline at dusk, I noticed the window frame didn't match the chain she usually booked through work. The curtains were wrong. It was nothing. It could have been nothing. On her third trip that month, I called her after dinner to ask about a bill notice that had arrived. She didn't pick up. A minute later a text came through. In the shower. Can I call you later? I felt ridiculous, but the phrasing pulled at something. Why text instead of calling back 10 minutes later? An hour passed, then another. I set the bill aside and instead wiped down already clean counters, the particular busy work you do when waiting feels unproductive. She called after midnight, voice bright, almost too bright. Sorry, drinks with the team turned into late-night ramen, she said. She laughed, a practiced light sound. I found myself smiling into the phone, because that is what we did, leaven the heaviness with easy jokes. After we hung up, I stood by the window and looked at nothing in particular until the glass reflected a tired man I recognized only partially. I started noticing the suitcase more. A new luggage tag appeared, a sleek leather one she hadn't had before, monogrammed with her initials in a font that looked expensive. Gift from the office, she said when I asked, and I believed her because offices do gift things, and sometimes those things look like that. On the next trip the tag was gone, replaced with a paper one from the airline. The strap broke, she said. Cheap leather. She made the word cheap sound like something sour. At home the bathroom door remained closed. Steam traced its signature along the frame. Sometimes I'd hear her voice inside, low, as if practicing or whispering, and water would run louder, a cover for sound. When she emerged, she'd be wrapped and brisk and already somewhere else in her head. I tried the gentle question route. Big day tomorrow? Always, she said, and smiled without showing her teeth. Once, when she left for a 2-night trip, she asked if I could pick up her preferred moisturizer from the pharmacy because she'd run out. I did, happy for a task that made me feel useful. When she returned, the bottle remained unopened on the shelf for a week while another brand, one I hadn't seen before, appeared in the trash. I fished it out with the edge of a paper towel because curiosity is not noble, but it is human. The label was in German. Switzerland, I thought, and replaced it quietly. I wasn't ready to admit that anything was wrong. It felt like a failure to even consider it. People who love each other grant each other benefit of the doubt. That's one of the currencies of a shared life. So I constructed practical, generous narratives. The firm was pushing hard. She was proving herself. Travel is disorienting. New colleagues bring new habits. I was careful not to let the stories calcify into excuses, but in truth they already had. The first time I opened a notes app on my phone and wrote a date with a 2-word description. Overnight delay. I hated myself a little. It felt like planting a flag on the wrong hill. But the note wasn't an accusation. It was a memory aid against the way worry erodes recollection. A week later there were 3 such lines. Late call, didn't pick up, hotel photo, curtains, bathroom, phone. It looked harmless, and maybe it was, then. We had a dinner with friends in the middle of all this. It should have reset the tone. She wore a green dress I loved and laughed easily, sparkling in a way that reminded me of our early years. On the ride home, I told her she'd been radiant. She squeezed my hand, eyes on the road, and said, "You're sweet." The next morning she left for a one-day client visit and came back with a particular exhaustion that looks like overexerted politeness. When I hugged her, the scent clinging to her hair wasn't the shampoo we bought, not the hotel lavender either, something citrusy, unfamiliar. I let myself be stupidly romantic for a second and thought, maybe that's what Zurich smells like in winter, even though I knew she hadn't gone yet. Money, in our home, had always been open. We kept a shared spreadsheet with the boring math of adulthood, rent, utilities, the little indulgences we allowed without commentary. In a practical mood one evening, I checked the credit card to confirm an upcoming payment and noticed a hotel charge in a city that wasn't on her itinerary. Not Zurich, not the nearby stops. A place between. The rate was modest, not a chain I recognized. I stared at the line item until the numbers blurred. Then I closed the laptop and decided I was tired. Her suitcase wheels developed a faint click-click, like a metronome for a song I didn't like. She promised the Zurich trip would be simple, really in and out, but added a day to meet the local team. When I asked, casually, about her hotel this time, she said, "They're putting me in the business district, boring as always." Her message later that night was a photo of a lake at dusk. Zurich has a famous one. You can search images and find 100 like it. I didn't search. I told myself that not searching was a form of trust. 2 days after she returned, we had one of those soft argument evenings that couples know too well. It started with nothing. A pan left to soak, her snapping that she'd do it later, me saying, "It takes a second." Then it became about everything. Schedules, tone, small resentments deployed like darts. She ended it by retreating to the bath with her phone. The locked door clicked once, then again. I stood in the hallway feeling absurd for being on the wrong side of wood and habit. That night in bed, I thought about vows. Not the ceremonial ones. We had said those in front of people who clapped and ate cake, but the unglamorous daily vows none of us speak out loud. I won't make you guess if you matter to me. I'll leave the door open unless I need it shut for a good reason. I'll tell you what time I'm coming home. They aren't rules so much as small lights along a familiar path. I realized some of our lights had gone out, one by one, while I kept walking as if I could see. On a Tuesday, she mentioned another overnight to the between city with a modest hotel rate. "It's easier to break the journey," she said. "I hate early flights." This was, in fact, true. She did hate early flights. I nodded, kissed her temple, and said to text me when she landed, the ordinary choreography of love. She texted a heart emoji, then a plane. When she was gone, the apartment took on a peculiar stillness. I ate toast over the sink, not from sadness, but because plates felt like too bold a statement. I watered the plant she always forgot and deleted a half-composed message that began, "Are we okay?" Because that is not a question you send into a hotel night if you don't want to invite a brave reply. Instead, I went to my desk and opened the Notes app again. I typed, "Overnight. Between city. Early flight avoided." Then I closed it and went to sleep. She came back the next day with tired eyes and the wrong souvenir, a box of chocolates from a brand that doesn't have a shop where she said she stayed. "Airport," she said easily when I raised an eyebrow. "You can get anything at airports." That, too, is true. Facts are accommodating when they want to be. I am not proud of what I did next, which was nothing. Not a confrontation, not a demand for her itinerary, not a speech about closed doors and changed perfumes. Nothing. I held the silence the way you hold your breath underwater, counting in your head, believing you can surface at the right moment if you're disciplined enough. It is strange, the things we call discipline when we are afraid. By then, the calendar knew more about our marriage than we did. Colored blocks marked her travel, my work, the dinners we kept moving and then canceling. I scrolled forward 2 months and saw her name on 3 more overnights, spaced like punctuation. I put my phone down and told myself the sentence might still end well. I began a new note, not because I had a plan, but because I needed a place to put the ache that wasn't accusation. I listed the parts of our life I didn't want to lose. The good quiet, the Sunday walks, the silly ritual of naming stray cats we saw from our window. I added to it over a week. Her laugh when she forgot the punchline, the way she retied my scarf without comment on cold mornings. I wanted a list to remind me that love is not made irrelevant by difficulty. It would have been easier to become only suspicious. I insisted, stubbornly, on remaining also tender. And that is where I stayed, in the soft, complicated middle between trust and doubt, holding both, waiting for the world to tilt in one direction or the other, telling myself I would know what to do when it did. The line between trust and suspicion narrowed until it felt like I was walking a wire. Every ordinary moment carried a second meaning. When she texted me a heart emoji from an airport lounge, I wrote it down in my notes app like a scientist recording data. Heart emoji, 7:42 p.m. When she said she was tired and went to bed early, I marked the time she turned out the light. Not because I wanted to live that way, but because I needed something to hold onto when memory blurred and doubt whispered that maybe I was imagining everything. Patterns began to emerge. Trips to the between city appeared like clockwork every 3rd week. Hotel charges repeated at the same property. Meal expenses showed up on the card that didn't match the story she gave me. Sometimes it was a sushi restaurant she claimed she hated. Other times a wine bar where 2 glasses always appeared on the bill. She explained none of them, and I didn't ask, not yet. I kept my notes, meticulous but hidden. She had her suitcase. I had my spiral pad and my phone log. When she left, I would check the mileage on her car. A supposed 5-minute drive to the pharmacy often came back with 10 extra miles. I noted that too. The entries started filling pages, neat rows of dates, times, and anomalies. Looking at them gave me a strange kind of calm, like I was converting chaos into order. One evening, she mentioned the client dinner. I asked where casually. She hesitated, then said the name of a popular brasserie downtown. Later, when I checked the account, I saw the charge was from a restaurant across the river, one known for candlelit booths. The difference wasn't subtle. I copied the transaction into my notes, circled the date, and went to bed without saying a word. I also started listening to her tone more carefully. When she spoke about work, she gave fewer details, as though trimming a story down to the safest version. A new name appeared again and again, Daniel. At first, it was small. Daniel handled the presentation. Or, Daniel thinks we'll get the account. But soon, it was woven into almost every update she offered. When I asked what Daniel was like, she shrugged. Quiet. Serious. Not really your type. The dismissal landed awkwardly. Why would I need him to be my type? One night, she forgot her laptop charger at home and texted me in a panic. I drove to drop it off at her office, but when I got there, the building was dark. I waited in the car for half an hour, expecting her to show up. She never did. Later she called, thanking me, saying she'd found a spare charger in a conference room and left early. The lie was smooth, but my notes app had already caught the gap. I began quietly preparing. Not for confrontation, not yet, but for protection. I gathered copies of our important documents and placed them in a folder. I moved a small sum of money into a separate account, just in case. I wasn't planning to leave, but I needed to know I could if the ground gave way beneath me. That precaution gave me a strange kind of strength. The loneliness in our apartment deepened. When she was home, she was often on her phone, thumb scrolling endlessly, screen turned just out of view. Sometimes she laughed at something quietly, and then caught herself falling silent when I asked what was funny. She spent longer in the bathroom, water running while I could hear faint murmurs, her voice low, like someone practicing a speech or whispering into the receiver. Our arguments grew sharper too. Little things became flares. If I asked why she hadn't mentioned an expense, she'd snap, "Do you want me to report every coffee I buy?" If I joked about her suitcase being permanently packed, she'd reply flatly, "That's what happens when you actually have ambition." Her words landed like small cuts, and I found myself retreating more often, swallowing my replies. I thought about confronting her more than once. I imagined sitting her down, laying out the receipts, the miles, the mismatched stories. But each time, I pictured her denying it all, turning the focus back on me, paranoid, controlling, jealous. Without something undeniable, I knew I'd walk away doubting myself more than before. So I waited, adding to the record. Then came the Zurich trip. She framed it as the biggest of the year, a client she'd been cultivating for months. She packed more carefully than usual, bringing new clothes I hadn't seen before, a perfume still sealed in its box. I helped her zip the suitcase, kissed her goodbye at the door, and smiled as if nothing inside me was breaking. That night, I opened the credit card portal again. No Zurich charge appeared. Instead, a modest hotel charge in the between city, the same place as before. I stared at the screen until the numbers burned into my vision. The story was over before it began, and yet I needed more. The next morning, I decided I wouldn't just log anomalies anymore. I needed to see it. Not to make a scene, not to corner her, but to let my own eyes settle the question. I told my office I was sick, threw a few clothes in a bag, and drove toward the city she had supposedly flown past. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but my resolve was steady. Because it was no longer about suspicion. It was about proof. The drive to the between city felt longer than it should have. Every mile ticked by with the weight of questions I already knew the answers to. Still, I clung to the small hope that I was wrong, that my notes and receipts were coincidences, that stress and bad timing had created shadows where there was no betrayal. Hope is stubborn that way. It doesn't surrender until reality tears it away. I booked a modest hotel room a few blocks from the property where her card had been charged. My plan wasn't to confront her there. I didn't want a scene, didn't want to be the man yelling in a lobby. I just needed to know. That night, I walked the quiet streets near her supposed hotel, blending in among travelers and late-night diners. When I finally saw her, the air seemed to vanish from my lungs. She was standing outside a restaurant, not in work attire, but in a dress I hadn't seen before, elegant, deliberate. Beside her was a man, tall, dark-haired, who placed his hand on the small of her back as they entered. They walked close, not the casual space of colleagues, but the intimate orbit of something deeper. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. I stood there long enough to burn the image into memory, then turned back toward my hotel. My notes, my records, they had all been leading here. What I had seen in those few seconds confirmed what months of suspicion had been whispering. Back in my room, I sat at the desk and opened my notebook. I wrote the date, the time, and one simple sentence. Saw them together. For the first time since I started documenting, my hand shook so badly the words were uneven. I closed the book and pressed my palms flat against it, as if weight could make the truth more bearable. The next morning, I checked out early and drove home before she returned. The apartment felt foreign, as though the walls themselves had overheard something I hadn't. I walked from room to room, touching familiar things, mugs, framed photos, the blanket we fought over on cold nights, and wondered which ones still belonged to us, and which ones were just mine now. When she came back 2 days later, she carried the same suitcase but wore a different perfume. She kissed my cheek lightly and launched into a story about Zurich, about presentations and late dinners with clients. I listened, nodding, while her words dissolved against the memory of her laughing outside that restaurant. That evening, while she showered, I sat at the kitchen table with my folder of notes and receipts spread out like a case file. Each piece of evidence was a fragment of a puzzle I no longer wanted to solve, but had to. I realized then that the notebook had done its job. It wasn't about building a case against her. It was about proving to myself that I hadn't imagined it, that my instincts had been telling the truth all along. The question wasn't if I would confront her anymore. It was how. I thought about rage, about throwing the papers in her face, demanding answers. But another part of me, quieter and steadier, insisted that I handle it differently. That I come to her not as a man begging for explanations, but as someone who already knew and was deciding what came next. I began rehearsing the conversation in my head. Simple, direct sentences. I know. I saw you. I can't continue like this. No shouting, no pleading, just clarity. I practiced breathing deeply, imagining her denials, her tears, her apologies. I promised myself I wouldn't let the moment spiral into chaos. For a week, I carried the folder everywhere, tucked under my arm like armor. Each day I waited for the right time, and each night I delayed. She moved around the apartment with her usual distracted grace, and I caught myself studying her the way you study a stranger, curious, detached, almost clinical. The right moment finally arrived on a Sunday evening. We had eaten dinner in silence, the clink of forks louder than words. She cleared her plate, rinsed it, and set it in the rack. Then she looked at me and asked, "Something on your mind?" I nodded. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. "Yes." "Sit down. We need to talk." She hesitated, towel in hand, then pulled out a chair across from me. Her eyes narrowed, wary. I opened the folder and slid the notebook toward her. Pages of receipts, dates, and notes spilled into the space between us. Her face drained of color. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her eyes flicked across the pages, the receipts, the dates, the notes in my handwriting. I could see the exact second when she realized what they meant, that I hadn't just noticed, I had been documenting, quietly building a record of the life she thought she had hidden. Her first words were defensive. "You've been spying on me." Her voice cracked in the middle, a mixture of anger and fear. I shook my head slowly. "No. I've been paying attention. And I saw you. At the restaurant. With him." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting could have been. She set the towel down on the table, her hands trembling. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't want you to find out this way." The confession spilled out in pieces. His name was Daniel, the colleague who had appeared more and more in her stories. She admitted the first trip to the between city hadn't been for work at all. At first, she said, it was just dinner, a way to escape the stress she felt at home. Then it became more. Each overnight trip was another lie, layered with new details to keep me from asking too many questions. I listened quietly, not interrupting, because there was nothing left to ask. The facts were already in front of me. What she offered now wasn't clarity, it was confirmation. When she finally stopped speaking, the kitchen felt unbearably small. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, they sounded louder than her voice had. "I can't do this anymore," I said softly. My voice shook, but the decision inside me was solid. "Trust doesn't survive this. Not for me." She cried then, real tears, the kind that leave no room for performance. She begged me to try to rebuild, to give her a chance to prove she could change. But trust isn't something you glue back together once it's shattered into dust. I told her as much, gently but firmly. That night, she packed a small bag and left to stay with a friend. I watched from the doorway as she pulled the suitcase, the same suitcase that had carried so many lies, down the hall. The sound of the wheels echoed like a verdict. In the weeks that followed, the routines of our marriage unraveled. We spoke only to divide the practical things: bank accounts, bills, who would keep which furniture. Friends reached out, some shocked, others unsurprised. My family told me I'd done the right thing, though their comfort didn't soften the loneliness that filled the apartment. But in that loneliness, I found something else: clarity. I stopped second-guessing myself. I no longer lived in the exhausting space between suspicion and denial. The truth, painful as it was, had set me free to move forward. One evening, I took the notebook, the pages filled with months of careful observation, and fed it page by page into the shredder. The hum of the machine swallowed the words until nothing remained but strips of paper. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let it define my future. Now, when I look back, I don't think about revenge. I think about resilience. About the lesson that love cannot survive without honesty, and that pretending not to see the signs only delays the inevitable. She had her choices, and I had mine. And my choice was to walk away with dignity, carrying not just the hurt, but also the strength of knowing I faced the truth head-on. The marriage ended there, but my life did not. It began again, quietly, honestly, and entirely my own.